Here we are.
Here we
Okay,
are.
Mirna, what are we here to talk about today?
Well, first of all, we figured every time that you and I meet, we have these great discussions, and there's a lot of wonderful brainstorming. There's a lot of gems that come up in our discussions, and we're like, we should really start recording some of these discussions. So we're here to talk about, really continuing the conversation on therapy and coaching, but specifically more about coaching and how that relates to setting up a psychologically safe culture in organizations, especially for us, since we're a fairly, well, not fairly, we're a very new organization. So,
Hmm.
yeah, let's see.
Yeah,
Let's see what comes up.
yeah, I think as I kind of reflect, it feels like a very coaching kind of exercise to do and, really trying to express what we're doing. And I noticed that as I've been chatting with other coaches, that these types of like informal brainstorming conversations are really helping to clarify our intentions for coaching, as I think that's also something that a lot of people are learning about is what is
Mhm.
coaching. Why is coaching, why do we keep hearing about this? And, what is it in the context of organizations, culture, and in terms of mental health? Because, I've heard coaching in a number of different contexts now. So I thought it'd be great to chat about it specifically, as it relates to what we're trying to do in Squirrel Space.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. So let's talk about what is coaching and what is coaching not, right? And
Mhm.
so I think at a very fundamental level, coaching is really about having um, really powerful conversations, guided by very clear, open-ended questions that really sparks interest and curiosity in whoever is involved in the conversation. To me, this is really also foundational to a healthy culture,
Mhm.
because it's not about coming in with assumptions about anything. It's really about entering conversations with curiosity. Like, why is this happening? What about this is helping us move closer to our goal? What about what's going on that's detracting us further from achieving our goals? So it's just very inquisitive, very curious. It's just very non-judgmental. I think it just sets the stage for people to be really comfortable, to show up authentically, knowing that this is just a conversation to learn and explore and evolve together.
And for coaching to take place, does it have to be in a workplace? Where are you seeing coaching making the most, like being applied the most? As when I started kind of taking coaching training, a lot of the perception of where it came from was maybe life coaching or even like peer recovery, like kind of Al-Anon coaches. Now, today, where do you see coaching the most often, and where do you see it having like a strong application?
I so I'm pretty biased, right? Because of how I've been trained and also what I've been observing for a while within the mental health field. I think coaching is really everywhere. Really, even in our conversations with a friend or a stranger, there's really an opportunity for everything to be a coaching moment,
Mm,
just by learning and being curious about anything. So that's very broadly, but I think more specifically, I do see it still everywhere, whether it's life coaching for personal development, or to achieve a very specific, health and wellness goal. I see it in workplace settings for really anything, career development. I just got a promotion and oh my God, like, what do I do with this? Realizing that there's a lot of thoughts that are coming up, with getting a new role or a new promotion. And so that's a wonderful opportunity to really work through that. So really everywhere.
Mhm. Yeah, what you're talking about kind of makes me think about there's, the coaching mindset and some of the principles of coaching. And then there's the kind of more formal being in a coaching setting or in a coaching session. What does a coaching session look like?
Coaching session, it's both structured but also very open. I know that sounds very contradictory, but as coaches, we do set the stage for asking to the client, what do you want to talk about today? What is the specific goal that you want to achieve by the end of the session? Because every coaching session, we are working towards a very specific client goal. So they will be walking away with a goal achieved and some action steps following that conversation. So what do you want to talk about? What's the specific goal? Very important. What's the measure of success? Like, how do you know that you've achieved that goal? Another important question in the very beginning of every coaching session is what makes this goal important for you? So from the get-go, we're really tapping into values and priorities for the client. And then the last question, typically what I ask and also how I've been trained is, what does the client feel that they need to first address in order to work on this goal? And that's really the meat of the coaching session. That's when clients will get a little bit into the story, which is
Mhm.
absolutely necessary, but the coach is really paying attention to what's helping the client or what's detracting the client. So here we're going to pick up on what are some limiting beliefs. And surprise, surprise, we all have limiting beliefs. And some are some pretty big ones that we call like gremlins, like I'm not good enough or I don't deserve. And so we definitely have to, clear that negative energy to help the client really propel forward towards what they really want to work for.
Mhm. Might be a silly question. How do people know what topic to bring to coaching, and how do they know what to work on?
Yeah, I would say that they know, even when they say, gosh, I know I had this appointment today and I really don't know what to talk about. And in the end, they really know. So the coach can ask the question, well, why is it that it is hard for you to come up with a topic today? What's standing in the way of you knowing what to talk about today? And just these very like basic questions, very interesting things can come up. For example, I've been thinking about a particular stressor, or I'm noticing that my mood has been off lately. Like I've just been like a little bit more irritable these days. And then the coach can ask, would you be open to talk about that today? And lo and behold, right, we have something to talk about. So even when the client says, I don't know what I want to address today, it's really the coach's, skilled questioning and reminding the client that they do know and that this early discussion will help them really, clarify for them what they already knew.
Mhm, mhm. Um, how does this differ from, if somebody wants to talk to a therapist, how would they know, what to bring to coaching, what to bring to therapy, seems kind of confusing for people that aren't familiar with coaching, because it can feel maybe a little bit vulnerable. What should people know about
Yeah.
kind of coaching, therapy, and
Yeah.
or both?
Yeah, for sure, for sure. I think, this is a great question. It's a complicated question. I'm going to try to just speak in very broad, general terms, but therapy is really for someone that is experiencing symptoms. They're experiencing something that is really impacting certain aspects of their life. So for example, is it interfering with their academic or work performance? Is it interfering with relationships? Is it interfering really deeply with how they feel about themselves? So their own relationship with themselves. And so therapy in many respects, it's really about working with clinical conditions like depression, anxiety, PTSD, and so much more. But the clinical condition is really interfering with functioning. And so it is confusing because in coaching, we can work with people that are noticing I have these goals, but something is getting in the way. And so it is important for the coach to have some familiarity with when do we proceed with these discussions. Is it really about clearing the blockers, like the limiting beliefs and the assumptions and interpretations and gremlins? Or is there something really symptomatic, clinical here that's getting in the way?
Mm-hmm. So if someone's choosing, how will you know, what are good indicators, if someone may benefit from coaching, or signs that coaching might be a first step versus like therapy, if you were to just give a general guidance to someone who's maybe relatively new to both?
Yeah, yeah. Another good question. I think it's really about the heaviness of what the client might be experiencing. So, for example, if they're just noticing that it's just hard to get out of bed, or there's a level of self-neglect, like I'm not sleeping enough, or my sleep is disrupted for whatever reason. um my appetite is off, I'm skipping meals. Like those would be some indicators to perhaps consider therapy first. um to consider coaching, honestly, I would encourage anyone that's curious about exploring what it is to have a conversation with a coach. The majority of coaches do offer um, a free consultation. A lot of times we call it a discovery call. And really, folks don't have to figure this out on their own. It's really just start a conversation, you know, um, book a call with a coach. And also many therapists also offer free consultations as well. So it's perfectly okay to set up some calls, interview people,
Hmm.
and ask the questions, and let the provider also answer that question for you. What would make whatever I've shared with you thus far make me a good candidate for therapy? What would make what I'm sharing, what I've already shared with you, a good candidate for coaching? And then even be bold, right? And ask the question, and when would you recommend both, given, right, the information that I've offered to you? So let the coach and the therapist really answer those questions.
Yeah, it sounds like there's a lot, a lot that's important about the chemistry and, the energy, or the yeah, the fit between either the coach or therapist and the person, it seems like maybe some of it is like what makes that person comfortable to have a relationship. Is that, a fair way to sort of look at things too? Is sometimes you really click with someone.
Absolutely. Relationship rapport is key, whether we're talking about therapy or coach. Um, in order for the work to be done in either discipline, the client has to feel seen, heard, affirmed, and validated. So that is across the board. And going back to what we mentioned early on, I don't know if we were recording yet, right? Because we get so
I can't
engrossed in our
remember.
conversations, right? About psychological safety.
Hmm.
Psychological safety is a well-known topic in organizations, thanks to the work of Edmondson and so many other people, right? But safety is really the foundational step in a coaching and a therapeutic relationship. If a client does not feel safe, they it is impossible for them to do the work because they don't feel free and open to share whatever
Mm.
they are thinking about, whatever they are feeling, whatever the barriers are that that's getting in the way for them either recovering, in a clinical sense, or approaching the goal, right, that's being addressed in the coaching session.
Yeah, that's a great point. So with the psychological safety, you know, therapy, for example, has a long reputation of professional ethics, and in certain clinical settings, which are often known to be very confidential. With coaching, especially if it takes place in the workplace or one-on-one sessions, what are the principles that coaching uses or has to practice in order to have that psychological safety. Um,
Yeah.
yeah, how does it compare to therapy? How do we make sure that coaching does feel safe for people? As you mentioned, you have to feel like you can be vulnerable with somebody.
Yeah, for sure. Confidentiality is key in both disciplines. I think it is definitely a bit more stringent in a clinical sense as it needs to be. Breaches of confidentiality occurs when there is a concern that the person is at imminent risk for self-harm and harm for others. Um, Coaching, there is a great overlap, so if a person is presenting with imminent risk, the coaches, it's in our code of ethics that we will breach confidentiality. Where it's a little bit more lax, I don't know if that's the best word, but at this hour in the morning, that's the only word that comes up. um it's a little different because, some of the employers, right, they do pay for coaching services for their employees, which I
Mhm.
think is a wonderful offering. So the coach has to be very explicit with the coaching agreement. This is a contract, and there is no such thing as being overly explicit, right? We really have to be very, very clear what will be shared, if anything, to the employer, the sponsor, also known as the sponsor, what will absolutely not be shared. And if there's any concern in the coaching relationship, right, that something may need to be disclosed, right? Whether the employer manager is asking for information because of a performance review. Well, we need to go back to the contract, right? And we
Mhm.
need to review like what did we agree upon from the very beginning, and only with the client's consent do we change anything pertaining confidentiality. So I was a little long-winded there, but basically in coaching, we're always thinking first of our very like who is our actual client, and it's the
Mhm.
person that we're we're sitting with.
Hmm. Yeah, it sounds like there's a lot of, balance that has to happen, in making sure that the coaching, function is supporting the sponsor's goals, but also is ultimately there to serve the individual, is what I
Right.
think I heard.
Yes.
As it relates specifically to, squirrel space and neurodivergence, is there any difference, in coaching there, or what makes coaching fit or work, particularly with people who are neurodivergent, or, in training people who manage people who are neurodivergent?
Yeah. Yeah. Again, another huge, huge question. I could go on for days on this. I think I want to first start with um, my I want to share a little bit about my own experience as a psychologist. You know that I've been a psychologist for a really long time, and I've assessed for things like ADHD specifically. And I've worked with many, many individuals that do have ADHD, whether they've been diagnosed as a child or even during our discussions as an adult, right? I'm the first one to say, "Hey, have you ever have you ever considered that there might be like some ADHD, going on here?" And more often than not, yeah, they've had ADHD all along. And I have found that with a lot of my patients, right, my therapy patients, um, it was really about understanding how their brain worked. And there was nothing clinically symptomatic about how their brain worked. They thought that there was something wrong with them. Other people have told them that there is something wrong with them. But really understanding how their brain functions, how their brain works, and how do you work with how your brain works was just very liberating and very freeing. And there was nothing to be fixed,
Hmm.
there was nothing, yeah, there was nothing to be fixed. It was really about understanding how does the brain work.
Mm.
So with many of my therapy patients, right, uh, it meant that this wasn't going to be long-term therapy. It was really just to give them information. And then I've made recommendations, given what you know now about, how your brain works just fine. It just works differently, but it's fine and it's different. We're embracing both of it. What do you want to do with this information moving forward? And maybe at this point you can work with a coach to continue propelling you forward to the goals that you have, knowing that there has never been anything wrong here.
Yeah, it sounds like, is that I guess taught, to therapists and to psychologists, or is that mindset about, nothing being wrong? Is that more in coaching? I've definitely heard and experienced some therapists that use coaching techniques, and so I'm kind of curious what, makes coaching a unique for neurodivergence versus therapy. And it seems like maybe that mindset,
Yeah.
in how you practice seems important.
Yeah, absolutely. And I do think it's part of our training, right? Because, and I'm only speaking for me as a psychologist, um, we're trained to identify problem symptoms and heal,
Hmm.
and help recover. So there's something problematic, symptomatic here, and it's the provider who guides that, right? So in many respects we're kind of like the authority figure, like
Hmm.
we're the specialists here. In coaching, the expert is the client. So the client is always the expert in their life. The coach is the expert in coaching, right? But and we are experts at asking very empowering questions, right? But the expert of the person's life is the individual. And so it's really the mindset that, you know, our clients are here to work on a goal. It's not to fix themselves, you know. It is a very different perspective.
Yeah, yeah. What is the role in, and I'm using this word broadly, so it could be professional judgment, clinical judgment. What is the difference in judgment, how judgment is used, or could be discernment is used in coaching versus therapy if you are working with, let's just say someone who is on the spectrum, with some, aspects of ADHD.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. And so the first thing that came up, and I'm not sure if it's going to directly answer your question, so, you know, bring me back if needed. I think in there is some similarity with coaching and therapy in that we are active listeners, right?
Mhm,
You know, we're really paying attention. As a therapist, I'm paying attention to see what is the best intervention,
mhm,
right? So what do I need to recommend? What do I need to ask the patient, the client to do given the symptom, the problem? So I'm listening to see what the intervention will be.
mhm,
In coaching, I mean, constantly listening, you know, we're active listeners. And it's to really um yeah, I mean, how do I put this? We're listening to the client's experience so that we can continue asking very important questions to help the client further gain insights about themselves. I mean, I know it's so convoluted, right? Um, and everything that we do is client centered. So the question that I'm going to ask next is what can help the client gain more awareness about themselves, their strengths, what's getting in their way of their goals, right?
mhm.
Whereas again, therapy, it's more about what is the intervention that the therapist needs to come up with in order to help this client feel better.
Mhm, mhm. Yeah, what it's interesting when you say the word problem, this immediate kind of association clicks in my mind. And, in coaching, when you're listening for, the facts, but you're also listening for client goals and kind of what's not being said, in some ways, it's almost like, you're trying not to problem solve,
Correct.
in coaching a lot, because what I'm hearing you say and what I've experienced is you're putting the client in the position to both understand themselves and, not be told, this is a problem. It's more holding the truth as, it shows up for client.
Right. Correct.
Um, how does that compare to, yeah, a therapist, a way of being trained, you use the word intervention and kind of looking for a diagnosis, from the standpoint or the mental model that
Mhm.
comes, with coaching. How does that difference in the mental model promote psychological safety, especially for people who are neurodivergent?
Yeah. I think I mean what matters most of course is solid training. Um I think the field, you know, the mental health field does I mean, we have licenses, right, that we need to uphold, and we are all required to do continuing education courses. And so it is right our responsibility to be informed. It is no secret that neurodivergence is pretty typical,
Mm-hmm.
right? Again, it's like, what is neurotypical, and the reality is that we all have our own unique way of processing information. So who is really neurotypical? Like, what does that even mean? But at
Mm-hmm.
any rate, there is just so much information like everywhere. It's all over on LinkedIn. I mean, it's just all over. You pretty much have to live under a rock and not know that there are just millions and millions of people, somewhere on the neurodivergence, really spectrum here. And
Mm-hmm.
so it is imperative for us to um, just be aware and be trained, because the reality is that it it doesn't matter what the specialty is,
Mm-hmm.
a big chunk of your caseload will have some neurodivergence,
Mm-hmm.
whether
Yeah.
it's neurodevelopmental or whether it's acquired.
Mm. What are common ways that someone who is neurodivergent could feel, I guess, misunderstood by traditional therapy models?
Yeah, again, since we tend to be, problem focused, symptom focused, diagnosis focused, and just taking a look at our traditional intakes, it's a lot of it is just very closed questions, yes or no, which I don't think is going to get a lot of rich information, regardless of who's in front of us. So. Um, I think with these intake questions, it doesn't necessarily allow for clients, patients to kind of just sit and process and talk through like what they really want to convey,
Mm-hmm.
because we're just going down the list, and depending on the work setting, there might be some pressure to you have to do an intake,
Mm-hmm.
it's a one shot deal. And then you have to have a diagnosis and you have to have a treatment plan. Whereas other organizations is like, no, this is a series of visits before you finalize the treatment. And then in private practice, we have a lot more flexibility on how long the intake process should be.
Mm-hmm.
Right. So even with that variability, that is already problematic, because you're going to get some folks that are going to be given the luxury of time to really expand on what is their experience, how is it impacting them? Is there a problem,
Mm-hmm.
right? How is it manifesting in the individual, as compared to those that really only have, like a 50 to 60-minute once opportunity before they're getting diagnosed, and working on a very specific treatment plan that has to be framed in a very specific way.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So if someone is looking for like specific skills, to build like for executive functioning, where does that fall? Is that in the coaching world? Is that in advising? Is that in therapy? Where does someone go for both? It sounds like, the goal setting, but what about the practical solutions where someone learns the skills, of maybe how to get more organized or structure things or prioritize.
Yeah. I think that ideally could be addressed in coaching, because the client is the one to identify what I want to work on, as opposed to being told this is what you should be working on, right? So it's again very client driven, client centered. Um, However, executive functioning skills training can also happen in the therapy session. It just really depends, what is the client being seen for. It would not um, it would not be a good practice for a clinician to say, oh, we've addressed the symptoms, and symptom severity is now in the mild, range. And now I'm going to refer you, it's like, no, it's just still appropriate to do some of this training in a therapeutic relationship, given that there has been a relationship.
Mhm. So it sounds like, there's a lot of choice involved. Like, someone can go to therapy and learn these skills. Somebody could go to a coach and learn these skills. Do you feel like it's, up to the individual to, get to know and research providers, or, again, kind of same question is, how does someone know, where do you start?
Yeah, yeah. I'll just say, don't expect for anyone to know, don't set that expectation for yourself. This is why there are many practitioners out there. So if someone is considering therapy, hop on, something like psychologytoday.com. You'll have, they're all licensed, professionals in the client specific state. So, get in the habit of reviewing profiles, take advantage of those free consultations. You will be interviewing the therapist. Of course, the clinician will ask questions because they want to make sure that they're practicing within scope, right?
Mhm.
But the reality is that the patient is just as much interviewing the provider for goodness of fit. The same goes for coaching, right? Take advantage of those free discovery calls. They usually are 15 to 30 minutes on average. Yeah, ask the questions, what would make me a good candidate for coaching? When would you consider referring me to someone else, like a consultant or a mentor or a therapist?
Yeah, that's great. As we kind of finish our time, what would you kind of end with that you'd want people to know about coaching?
Um, Really, just try it. Right? Yeah. Again, there's so much information out there on coaching. Um, and just speak to several folks, because some of it, it does vary depending on our training. It's no different than therapy. Um, just Yes, just book some calls, ask questions, get curious. Especially, because coaching is really coming with the mindset of, you are not broken.
Mhm.
There's You don't need to be fixed. And it's really about, well, what do you want to work on? You know, to help you move towards your dreams and your visions and your aspirations in life, whether it's personal or professional.
Wonderful. Thanks, Mirna, and hopefully we do this again soon.
Yeah, looking forward to it.
Okay, bye.